Good morning. Good morning. Well, I get the wonderful job of welcoming you all to the School of Social Work today. Deborah has a great program put together for you, and I know you're really going to enjoy Drs. Betru and Hughley today. And just in case you're a bit traumatized, we have lots of really experienced, great social workers in the room to help you out, right? So part of my job in welcoming you this morning is also just telling you a little bit about the School of Social Work. In spite of being the MSW program director, I'm going to give some broad remarks, but then of course I'm going to tell you about the MSW program as well. So this time of year, we're in this transition of preparing to graduate students, and in fact, in about a month, we'll be graduating about 45 bachelor's students and about 150 master's students, and so far 2 PhD students as well. So we're really proud of all of these students and their accomplishments, and we'll be celebrating as they walk across the stage and are congratulated in their academic achievement. While we're doing that and we're all preparing for the end of another academic year, we're beginning to welcome students for the next year. And so we have, in fact, right here, right now, we have a group of students for the master's program that have been recruited from all over the United States, and they're visiting today, and I'll be speaking with them later in the day. Tomorrow in this very room, it will be at least as full as it is now as we do an information session for prospective students. So it's that time of year where we prepare to say goodbye to one group and hello to yet another group. I also want to let you know about some exciting new programs that we have worked on very hard this year in the MSW program. And in fact, we had the faculty just last month passed unanimously 2 new dual degree programs. One is with the School of Education, and I'm looking over at James because he has an education background. And it took a year because it was a bit tricky to negotiate this dual certificate and degree program with the School of Education. It will be an MSW, and students will qualify for the Home and School Visitor Certificate and a secondary education teaching credential. So this is a very exciting compilation of 2 programs. It has passed our faculty, and I think it's going up in the School of Education. In fact, I think it just passed the School of Education. I think I just got that email yesterday, and it is now going forward to the provost. So that's very exciting, and that will launch in the fall. We also have another dual degree program that we're working on with the MSW and the MBA program. This will be particularly for the COSA, for those of you that are grads, the macro part of our social work MSW program, and the Masters in Business will be integrated as a joint degree program. So that's very exciting as well. Has also passed the MSW faculty or the School of Social Work faculty rather, and will go to the CAT School of Business next to be passed. So we're excited about having new initiatives. The university is going towards interdisciplinary education. We already have several dual degree programs, so being able to add 2 additional dual degree programs is really good for us and for the university. We also are looking forward to bringing on 2 new full-time tenure stream faculty in the fall. And so we continue to build our resources within the school. Our enrollment we're doing wonderful. The School of Social Work is, we continue to maintain our enrollment numbers. Our students just get better and better as we are able to be increasingly selective as the pool of applicants grows. So we're in a growth mode, and it's just wonderful. There's so many exciting things happening in the school. We have more grants coming in than ever. A lot of our grants currently are training grants, so all of the money goes towards students, actually, because we're very committed to trying to assist students to not rack up as much debt as that's just currently a problem with students everywhere. The debt load is something that concerns us very much, and so we're trying to assist students with grants and scholarships as much as we possibly can. So I think that's probably anything else that I'm missing. We have lots going on in the school and in the wider university, as many of you found in terms of parking this morning, and so you can look forward to a very exciting day. Thank you.
All right, everyone can hear me okay? Okay. Deborah, thank you so much for inviting me and for giving me the opportunity to share what I love, which is trauma-informed work, which is great for dinner party conversations normally. So that goes really well. I want to say that it was easy to say yes to Deborah because, one, she's a fantastic social worker, and she's an incredible friend. And so I think this idea as well of doing school-based work and then particularly centering it on trauma is a natural fit. And so her vision and her ability to bring people together is a great gift that she has, and we're lucky to have her in the school. So thank you, Deborah, for inviting me. Okay, so today what I want to do is talk to you about trauma-informed work in school settings, and I wanted to give you a little bit information about myself and how I got started in the work. And so as she mentioned, my clinical background is that I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I started social work as maybe some of you have, wanting to be a therapist. I thought, I really like working one-on-one, and I'm such a good listener, which turns out to be actually I'm thinking about how I'm going to solve your problems. I wasn't actually listening. So that took a while to iron out. And so as I got to do more of the work, one of the things I started recognizing was that people are coming in with very similar symptoms. They're coming in dysregulated. People are coming in with tremendous amount of stress. And my job was to sort of, help kids. A lot of times it's anger management, right? To help them manage their anger. When really that wasn't the heart of the issue. The issue is that they have tremendous amount of stress at home. And they have tremendous amount of grief that they're dealing with. And so that one-on-one where they're coming to me and I'm supposed to resolve them of that one individual incremental problem, I realized that just wasn't enough. And so I started actually working in the schools and started working more collaboratively and recognizing that individual interaction and that one-on-one is not enough. And it's not supposed to be enough. We're supposed to actually live in a community. And so that's why the school setting is a natural setting for social work. So the schools that I've worked in, and typically the ones that they mandate school social workers to be a part of, my schools were always in the news. And so I wanted to share with you a couple of the institutions that I worked at. So this is my first school. This was, I worked in Oklahoma City Public Schools, and our school always made the news for not necessarily the best things. And so this was sort of the most recent issue
decades,
that it was in the news
St. John
for, so I
Heart
wanted to share
Institute
that
has
with
been
you.
a leader in cardiovascular care. We offer preventive screenings and faster heart attack response times than the national gold standard. We're your partner through every stage of heart health.
A high school principal under investigation, and it's not his first time in the spotlight either. We first introduced you to Douglas High School principal Brian Staples back in 2010 after a man attacked him with a billy club. New at 5, Lisa Monahan tells us why the principal could now be in a fight for his job.
Well, grade tampering and altering attendance records. The allegations against the principal are surfacing on the first day of school, but it appears these problems began nearly 2 years ago. Oklahoma City Public School administrators confirm an ongoing investigation into allegations against Principal Brian Staples.
It's about the relationships with our kids.
Despite the principal's remarks, several accusations have been filed against Staples in the last 2 years. The allegations include falsifying attendance records, altering student grades, and creating racial tensions at Douglas High School. In 2010, a group of teachers filed a wrongful termination lawsuit against Staples, the school district, and some of its members, suggesting they were mistreated and fired for not cooperating with Staples' attempts to hide failing students to rank better in the district. Firing the teachers, specifically the former vice principal, is also the suggested reason for an attack made on Staples. The former vice principal's son, Elijah Muhammad, spoke out at the time of the attack.
When they're saying that, someone is just so fed up that they would boldly attack someone in broad daylight, that's pretty serious.
Prosecutors later charged him with planning the attack. Muhammad allegedly hired the hit because he was angered with how Staples treated his mother and other black teachers and students. News 9 is now learning the fired teachers and other accusers plan to rally at the school this week. Well, Oklahoma City Public School administrators responded today by saying the group has a right to express their opinion and that the district is investigating and taking the allegations seriously. Live in the newsroom, Lisa.
So that was the high school that I started my social work career in. And so the principal, we had attendance issues, as most distressed schools would do. And so one of the ways that he thought he would remedy that is if you were actually absent or tardy, we would drop you from the rolls. So what that does for us is it looks like they were never enrolled. And so our school attendance records would go up. And so that was part of our intervention. That was how we help folks. And of course, the school was overrepresented for the community, and it was predominantly African American. And so the racial tensions was definitely something that was felt and known every day. And in fact, it was after doing this work for several years that I recognized that, this can't be the way that we operate, right? And so my essay actually to get into my doctorate studies was about this one young man that I'd been doing work with. And I was doing intervention with him and his family, and he was incredibly violent. And one of the days that, and fights were regular. It was just sort of a norm. And one of the things that I had to do was that I saw a whole group of students centering around a fight, which is what normally happens. But I noticed that our school resource officer was standing off to the side. And I thought, well, what's happening? So I seemed to be the only one that was always asking, like, what's happening and why is this normal? And so I go in and I recognize that my student is actually choking another much smaller student. And I had to actually get in there and pry his fingers off of another child. And I look at the officer and I said, what are you doing? And he just looked at me and said, oh, I don't do him. I just don't do Marcus. And so that's when I recognized that when this level of violence becomes normal and you can opt in and out of who you intervene with and who's worth saving and who's not, that there's got to be something that's got to be done. And so that's what's prompted me to recognize the role that trauma plays in the lives of our students, and that I actually, one, I don't know what I'm doing. So that was one of the other things I recognize, is that I actually probably should get some training in this. And then two, that there's a gap in this research, and that we actually have to infuse social workers with this knowledge so that people don't have to feel the way that I feel, that we're not practicing on our clients, that we're not sort of going, how do we survive the day? And so that's one aspect of the work that I did. I came to Pennsylvania to attend the university, and my other experience was in rural social work. And so this is the other headlines that my school got, or that community got. Plugged in at last, regretfully. So they didn't have a cell phone tower, and this was in Renova, Pennsylvania. How many of you are familiar with where? So there's Lock Haven, and then there's Renova. So you drive 20 minutes up, and the cell phone services don't exist there. And so it's literally a remote community in which they have internet, but they just recently got cell phones. And so people fight the good old-fashioned way. They fight on Facebook. So a lot of my intervention centered on please shut down that Facebook site. So I have these dual experiences of working with folks in both institutions and in settings, and you know, and the experiences of being in rural area where they use the term colored to mean something positive, you know, and so I was the colored social worker, and we're, you know, we're talking 3-4 years ago, and that was a term of endearment. That's what that's them being nice. So initially I was like, oh my God, what am I? My parents are always worried about my jobs. So, but in both instances, again, as I mentioned, what I kept seeing was that folks were experiencing tremendous amounts of stress in their lives, and our students were the ones that were manifesting that the most behaviorally. And so I come in because a child is refusing to attend school, right? School refusal is one of the areas. I come in because there's behavior on the bus. You know, there's a little girl in this community where she was actually accusing other students of harming her, and what the bus camera revealed was that she was actually punching herself repeatedly in the stomach and then coming in and sharing that others were hurting her. And so my job was to figure out what's wrong with this little girl. And so, of course, as I sit and talk with her, I recognize that, you know, her family's gone through a tremendous amount of change and that she recently lost a sibling. And so, you know, my job is then to pull the parents in who are fighting together and say, we have to have a talk. It's actually, she's not actually the problem. She's a symptom of what's happening. But for the most part, what's happened to her and what's happened to you. And so that's the part where I feel like trauma-informed work and where our job as social workers and as people in the community starts. So I wanted to just share a little bit of that background with you. And we'll go back to more of the academic part, which I know you guys are excited about. Okay. So we have same problems, different institutions. The other settings that I've worked in have been in homeless and shelters. I manage a transitional shelter. And then I worked briefly in the county jails. And so what I noticed was that I was seeing the same parents or the same family systems transitioning through different institutions. So I'm like, oh, you're so-and-so's cousin. I saw you at the school, and then now they're in jail, and then because of different stressors and reasons, they're having to be in my homeless shelter. And so if we keep recycling people but are not addressing the core issues within each institution, I feel like the problem is us. We have to figure out that our interventions aren't working. And so that's where trauma-informed work comes in. Someone asked me, as a philosophical question, as something that we think about, who's responsible for resolving trauma in the lives of children and youth? And so I kind of wanted to pose that to you initially. Who do you think is actually responsible for resolving this? What are some answers that come to you, if I can get a couple of folks who are bold enough to share? Mm-hmm.
I think we have to give people tools to resolve themselves.
Okay. So tools to resolve it themselves. So maybe the students or the children have the capacity to resolve that. Skill building. What's good skill building? Okay. Mm-hmm.
I think the community has a responsibility. We all come together with different resources to provide for the students.
The community? Yes.
Anyone who's had the knowledge and the experience too. So if anyone who's in touch with the children or youth or families who has come back with their own knowledge and resources to be able to support.
So a knowledgeable person with resources and capacity to address that. Yeah. Absolutely. Okay. Any other thoughts?
That child has some level of responsibility. They have to own some of that.
The child themselves. People have great capacity to heal. I think that's what she was sharing. I think for me, as a child welfare worker, and that's my area of research and specialty as well, what we always say, especially in child and family policy, is that at the end of the day, the parent is responsible for the child. The parent is responsible for resolving any stressors that come into the the lives of their children. That's one of their many roles as a parent. And so at the end of the day, when something happens to the child, we go to the parent and say, or where was the parents? You know, even in the case of the incident with Circle C, where we had the death of a teenager who was attacked by two of his housemates, my first question instinctually was, where was the parent? But of course they're in residential foster care, so we know where they are. And so for me, and for society and structurally, the parents are actually the ones that are supposed to take care of traumatic grief and loss. At the end of the day, they're the ones that are supposed to interact and be that safe place. And of course, we see a lot of gaps in that, right? And so when the parents fail, what happens? Now, when kids are in school, our job is actually to be custodians of them. We are the parents for that period of time. For 8 hours of the day, or however long school tends to be, we are the guardians, emotionally, educationally, psychologically, for the students that come into our buildings. And so that responsibility of resolving that traumatic stress then comes back to us. I think oftentimes people say, just like that officer, oh, I don't do that. My job is to make sure that people are safe and can walk up and down the hallways. It isn't to ensure that you got enough sleep and that you feel secure and happy. That's not my role. How many of you have heard teachers say, I don't do that. That's not what I'm equipped to do. I can't. I don't have the training for that. And I think that's well-intended and well-meaning. But because of the backgrounds that our kids have, we don't have the luxury of deciding what we can and can't do. We are now mandated to respond in a holistic manner. And I think social work is particularly situated to answer this because we're always person in environment. That's actually how we think, right? We always think what happened and how did they get here. But oftentimes in institutions where you're actually responsible just for reading and math and science, you're going, I can't teach science when this kid is, you know, throwing things at me or isn't responding or doesn't come to class, right? And so what am I supposed to do? And so the answer to that is you actually have to get involved. You have to actually get involved. And so school is the largest and most democratically accessed institution. I am Ethiopian originally, and I'm an immigrant and came to the US when I was 9. And one of the things that my family came to the United States for was education. It was one thing that we knew that was free and accessible and a way for upward mobility. And so we just assumed that once you got here, things get better, right? We're like, just get here. That's all that matters. Once you get here, it's all going to be good, right? And to a certain degree, there's that immigrant mentality where you put blinders on to a lot of the institutional and organizational discrimination or barriers because you're so focused because failure is not an option. And so for us, coming to the schools and accessing that is an easy upward mobility because there's no way out and we'll do whatever it takes. And there's also not a history of oppression that we bring with us in our relationship to outsiders. And so, you know, when we arrived here, I was able to focus and say, okay, schools are the way for us to get out. It's a way to move up and a way for us to get out. And what we know now is that although there are schools, they're not all equal, right? And so, but if you have that principle, society's tasked with being a parent for the times they are in school. And what we have in schools now, though, in terms of disparity, is that children are coming to schools that aren't equally distributed in terms of resources. They don't have the same types of teachers. And they're also not coming from the same types of homes where they've gotten adequate rest, they have enough food to eat. And so you have students that are showing up with tremendous amount of needs. And so what we know is that children can't actually learn when their basic needs are met. We don't actually have students that show up ready to learn in the schools that social workers are most often in. That's certainly not the case in the high school that I was at. The first one that I showed you, Douglas High School, kids actually weren't allowed to bring backpacks because we had a lot of issues with weapons. And so they just showed up. It was amazing to me. I've never seen students just show up. I always called it like church. They just show up just as they are. No backpacks, no folders, nothing. So they had 2 sets of books, one that they kept at home and one that each individual teacher kept in the classroom, and they had folders in there. And we're talking about middle school and high schoolers. This isn't elementary kids. And so the way that the system adapted was by just resolving, not necessarily to solve that problem, but just to constantly react to that crisis, as though it's normal to not carry books to school. It was shocking to me, although it's normal not to have backpacks. And I would come in as an outsider and go, why do they not have backpack? Why is there no homework? There was never homework. Because one of the things I'd say is, how are they doing with their homework? And they're like, oh, we don't assign homework. It just doesn't get done. So the notion that, you know, all children aren't treated equally, because this with these kids, and that's what they always try to tell me, is you have to treat these kids a particular way. And these are folks from the community that have lived there their whole lives. And so everybody sort of had an understanding of how these kids were going to be. And it was normal. It was totally normal. And so they always thought I was the softie because I was shocked, right? Okay. So what do we actually know that kids need? For the most part, we know we have a good amount of research that tells us what kids need. It's not rocket science. We know what they need economically, we know what they need educationally, and we know what they need health and community-wise. Economically, it's fairly simple. They need parents with stable incomes. You know, you want to have a solution to a lot of our problems, give parents stable and consistent work. They need to live in homes that are stable and where the rent or mortgage ratio to that house is not more than 30%. That's fairly simple. Educationally, we know that again, they need parents that are educated. Particularly, they need mothers that are educated. That's actually one of the best measurements and predictors of family success. How educated is the mother in that house? Health-wise, they need to be born into healthy families, right? It's not, again, the things that we know that work. There've been a tremendous amount of research around all of this, but they need to be able to be born in a healthy environment. Then they need access to insurance, and they need access to quality nutrition, right? Basics, basic needs. We know what kids need. And then community-wise, they need to live in safe communities where they like to live where they live, and where there's a pride and safety. You know, do you actually like where you live? Do you plan on staying there? A lot of the kids have never actually left the communities that they're in, even though maybe a mile away is the suburbs or a mile away is the rich part of town. And so one time I was supposed to bring something for, I think, a teacher conference or something, and I brought bagels from Panera. And the kids were like, what is that? I said, these are bagels. And they said, what are bagels? I was like, it's a donut with, it's bread with a hole in it, right? Like, I didn't know how to deconstruct what a bagel was, right? And so it was fascinating to me that a bagel seemed like this outside experience. And they always looked at me and told me I ate strange food because, you know, my food had like nuts in it. And I had ravioli and, all kinds of stuff. They had a lot of opinions about me. So to think that something as simple as a bagel from, a store a mile or two away as a foreign object to American students, right? It just was like they just couldn't fathom it. And so what happens, though, is where the gaps fall in is when we can't attend or meet any of these needs. And so I actually wanted to give you some numbers. So this is from Measures of Well-Being. The Annie E. Casey Foundation does an incredible report where they tell us where the state of the nation is. And so, again, as I mentioned, the economic well-being. So let's evaluate where we are as a nation. I think it's on. Ooh, it works. To bring my mic with me. Okay, so economically, what we see in terms of poverty is actually 23% of children live in poverty. The poverty rate in the United States is about 13%, and of that, 23% are children. which is fascinating for someone who's coming from a developing nation, right? The fact that we have a tremendous amount of resources, but at the same time, children are going to bed hungry. It's fascinating. Children whose parents lack secure employment. This is where I was talking about the economic need. 31%. And then here it talks about if it's gotten better or worse. And we see that the statistics are worse, right? Children living in households with high housing cost burden. So that means a majority of their money is going towards rent. For the most part, most people aren't mortgage owners. And so that's 38%. So people have to decide, and oftentimes it's 50% of their paycheck. And I'll see this quite a bit with my clients, or I did, where they make decisions about rent and then food, and then school stuff comes later, right? And then if they have to choose school stuff, then that means that the rent and other things take the back seat. And so that's when I call them sort of the stinky kids. When they start smelling, that's an indicator there's no water in the home for the most part. And so that's because they have to pay rent. And then teens not in school and not working, that's 8%. I think that's interesting that they always measure that as an economic well-being. But we know that kids who are used to working or have that as a social norm actually do better. So they're not just sitting around with nothing to do. They're not in school. So what does this number look like in Pittsburgh? So one of the great things that we provide for the community is that we did a demographic report of Pittsburgh. So we know what this looks like nationally. And so what do our numbers look like for us? So I always talk about disparity and disproportionality because we can't talk about numbers and trauma or any of this stuff without having a picture of what that looks like for subgroups of people. And so here we see that of the children that live in poverty, this is a national average, 40% of them are African American. Again, African Americans make up about 11, 12% of the population. But they're overrepresented. And then it's American Indian. American Indian is also 1% of the population, 37% up here. Children, parents who lack secure employment, African American, 49, American Indian, 49. And then the numbers go down. Hispanic is 38, non-Hispanic, white, right? So in Pittsburgh, what does that look like for us within our own community? So we see the median household income by race and ethnicity. Pittsburgh is very much black and white. Our numbers tend to break out that way. And so a lot of the demographic report tends to just report on black and white for the most part. So what we see as the median household income for the city of Pittsburgh, and this is sort of the aggregate data, is that it's 51% for, $51,000. This is in dollars for white Pittsburghers, and it's $26,000 for black Pittsburghers. That's, that's twice. So we see the disparity and the disproportionality represented over and over again. These are the kids that are in our schools that we're serving. So we know what they need economically, and yet the numbers tell us a different story. So maybe it's different in health. You guys know where this is going to go. All social work stories end sadly, right? Where I'm always like, but wait, there's hope. It'll come in the end, right? So health, we're looking at birth weight of babies. So we know that that's due to maternal health. That's an indicator of well-being. How well is mom being taken care of? It always goes back to the parent. At the end of the day, we like working with the kids, but the kids come in context, and that context is the parent. So if we don't work with the parent, we're going to have a parent giving low birth weight, right? Although parents are rough to work with, I know. Been there. I've been threatened by some too. I had one tell me that she was going to, she had her stiletto out, and she said, I'm going to poke your skinny self out with this stiletto. And I was like, she thinks I'm skinny. Thank you so much. I'm strengths-based. I was like, wow, I think we can get somewhere with this. I feel real good about this. I think she was surprised. So that's why you have to have a sense of humor, because you just will not survive if that's not the case. So this is the case of children without health insurance, 7%. So that's improved. We know why that's improved, right? The healthcare law. What does that look like for, again, when we're looking at disparity and disproportionality? low birth weight babies. The national average is 8%. African American, 13%. American Indian, 7.6. Hispanic, 7. And then white is 7. So we see children without health insurance, 7%, 6%. Again and again, we see those numbers. What's particularly distressing in Pittsburgh is the infant mortality rates by race. Here, we actually see that child and teen deaths has improved. It's actually gone down. But what we see in Pittsburgh is that the infant mortality rates by race is double. So it's, per 1,000, we have 12 babies die, 12 black babies compared to white. So that number is actually worse for us. So I always joke that if you can choose to be born, choose to try to be born in America, try to be white if you can help it, or Asian. Actually, Asians have better numbers. And try to make sure that you live under any circumstances, try not to be born African American. Because it's a matter of luck. I think a lot of people think that it's a matter of earned privilege, right? It's pure luck where you're born, what community you're born into. And so the notion of schools and other things that are supposed to be democratic institutions in which people are able to better themselves, you're supposed to come in, and despite where you're born and despite what happens to you, you're supposed to get better. And what we see instead is that you might actually die if you're born the wrong race. That's pretty sobering. I always say, try not to be born a woman, right? That's tough. It's a tough gig. All right, so community. This is where we see children in single-parent families, 35%. That's actually gotten worse. One of the other things that I tell people, if you, as a social intervention policies, get married right away, it doesn't matter who it is. Love schmub, right? Because that just doubles your income, hopefully. Get married to someone with a job. Send your students to Pitt. They'll get lots of knowledge from their instructors. Children and families where household lacks high school diploma, that's 15%. So again, it goes back to the well-being of the parent. So if the mom is doing okay, mom's very important. Mom is doing okay because they tend to be the caregivers for the most part. The family does okay. So what does that look like for us in Pittsburgh? Oh, and then I love that question of people who like their neighborhood and who have positive feelings about their neighborhood. If you think about your own neighborhood and where you live, we get a chance to pick where we live. I'm in the process of buying a home, and so I think about where I want to live, what community I want to be a part of, and how that makes me feel at the end of the day. And so, and how good do I feel about that? Because that actually impacts my well-being. And so for people in Pittsburgh, they asked them, how do you feel? Do you feel good, very good, or feel like Pittsburgh's an excellent place? And again, Pittsburgh's always voted as one of the most livable cities. And we see disparities, right? So black people said, 56% of them said, yeah, they feel good about it, while whites, 80% said they feel good. And then there's those numbers played out again. Single female-headed families as a percentage of families with children by race and ethnicity, 67% in Pittsburgh for black single moms, and 25% for whites. And then, of course, education, which is the part that we're interested in. So for the most part, what we know is that children don't just need to do well in pre-K, they need to do well throughout their studies, right? And so it's not a matter of how well are they doing in kindergarten. They have to actually do well in 3rd grade. So we know middle school is really important. 6th grade is particularly important. And 8th grade determines actually and can be a good predictor of outcomes for high school graduation. So by the time they get to 8th grade, if we haven't captured them at that point, it's really tough. One social scientist says, if I could do an intervention for education, what I'd like to do is actually get them before they're born. Like, this, right? His intervention is, what he's saying is actually like to get a hold of that mother, right? I'd like to get a hold of that family and see how I can strengthen them. And so this is where we see the numbers. Children not attending preschool, 54%. Fourth graders not proficient in reading, 66%. Eighth graders not proficient at math, 66%, right? High school students not graduating on time, 19%. My father, when we came to the US, I was like, oh, okay, so I'm graduating from high school, and we see all of my peers having these huge parties, right? And he looked at me and was like, I don't understand. Aren't you supposed to graduate? Like, why are we? It makes no sense that we're having this celebration for what should be very normal, right? It's just baffling. But again, we don't have that history of oppression. And we don't have that background of having to survive. We have a different survival story. And so the notion of actually making it through and seeing this numbers, that's not part of the thinking that happens. And so, we come here with the notion that I have to get my doctorate. Actually, I'm supposed to be a real doctor. Right, so they always used to tell their friends that I was a psychologist, and I was like, no, I'm not. Because that was sort of the best that they can do with social work. So they're really relieved I'm in a higher ed and not in the jails. That was rough on them. Because they would see my schools, right, in the news, and they would see that the principal's getting attacked, and that my life was in danger. But what I think they didn't realize was that I was actually very much protected because of the relationships that I had with my students and the parents. And so what they would do for me is that they would actually tell me what was going on and what's going to happen. And I'd be part of the community conversation about what's coming down. And so I felt quite protected, actually. And I gave rides to kids. I took them to their houses quite often. So I also knew where everybody lived. And I said I would snitch, I would sing, right? So children not attending preschool, we're not surprised, right? The same patterns of numbers. African Americans tend to be overrepresented in the risky numbers. In Pittsburgh, so percent of adults aged 25 and older with less than a high school degree by race and ethnicity. So these are folks who don't have their high school diploma. And so here we see we have 10% that's white, 16% that's black for the city of Pittsburgh, 4% Asian, and 12.2% Hispanic. We see these numbers repeated over and over again. So we see that there's gaps. That's not a surprise to us. That's why we're in this field. But when you see the numbers, it's quite sobering. And it makes us think about these core questions. What's happening? Why do we see this disparity when we are in a nation, in a country that is supposed to be wealthy? And what's happening to the lives of the kids that are interacting with these numbers? And so that's where trauma-informed work comes in. So what trauma does, and what I was interested in asking, was what's happening and what's happened to the children that are coming to me presenting with these problems so that I can understand and have interventions that make sense for them and the community. So it's targeted intervention. And I have to provide that service in a conscious manner. A lot of trauma-informed work is about a stance. I think people feel really intimidated by trauma work because they feel like they have to work with, PTSD symptoms, essentially. Like, what do I do with families that have chronic dissociation or people that have flashbacks? When the reality is trauma-informed work is really about a stance of being informed about the history so that you can tailor your interventions in a conscientious manner. And so it should shift who you are on the inside. And what happens is what people know, first of all, people know when you like them and don't like them. So when you have clients or students or family members and you don't like that parent and that family, they know it. You can pretend and you can say, like, I do my best. I try to be neutral. You can't be neutral sometimes. And some things where abuse or obvious neglect is there, we have to take a stand. We're guardians of the children at the end of the day. But for the most part, when you see parents who have these histories and you recognize the disparity in numbers, the way that you intervene is going to be very different than if you thought that these were parents with bad behaviors. So I think for a long time with the medical model and the way that especially criminal justice folks and that the cops said, I don't do him. I've worked with him, I've pulled him off students before, and I'm not doing it anymore. And so I can understand where he says, I'm fed up with this behavior. But I know what happened to him last week. I know that his mother appeared in his life out of nowhere. I know that his father allows him to do whatever he wants, whenever he wants. And I also know that he was sexually abused. And so because of that, I don't give up. Because someone has to get engaged, and someone has to say, it's okay for me to get involved with you again and again and again. And so services are provided in a format that's conscious and in a safe manner. And there's some trauma-informed principles. And so my principles, let me pull them out. These are part of our objectives, right? Yes. Take notes. Right? So the core principles of trauma-informed work is that you have to understand the impact of trauma on the lives of people, and I'll define what we're talking about, right? So sometimes it feels like everyone has trauma or no one has trauma, right? So we've got to find what's in between. You have to think about safety and creating and promoting safety. That's sort of the most important work that you can do, especially as for social workers, we're visitors in an institution that already exists. And so we have to think about how we promote safety and how safe we are to the institutions that we're entering into, and then how safe we are for families. And then you have to do intervention in an authentic and planned way. Oftentimes, I think we're ready for people to get better, and we'll go, you know, if you just get job training, everything would be better, without doing some of that background work of actually engaging the parent or the family or the system. And so trauma-informed work is very deliberate, it's conscientious, and it knows that things don't happen linearly. Sometimes you make progress and sometimes you go back. And so that's sort of expected. So you're not surprised by people's behaviors. You can actually account for it. Okay. So how is trauma defined? Trauma is mostly defined as traumatic stress for right now. And so it's actually how your body handles and perceives threat. So what happens is when you face threat, normally you have two choices or three choices. You can, the fight or flight response, or freeze. Oftentimes you can freeze. So you can fight the situation and see if you can get rid of the threat by actually combating it. Two, you can flee. It's my favorite option. I'm a runner, so I always like to think about the exit strategy. And the other is freeze. And oftentimes what we see with kids, because they're so small, they tend to freeze, right? So they actually become still or they dissociate. And so, but in the case of trauma, your internal resources, your biological and physiological resources are not equipped enough to deal with the threat that you're facing. Both internally and externally. So you have this thing, it's like a bear, you have this thing that's too big for you to handle. And so what happens to you then is that your internal and external resources, your body either has to escape or do one of the fear-activated systems, and you have intense fear and helplessness. And so that's the state of being traumatized. We call it, it's a biological response, and it's predominantly a stress response. And so it's important to understand the impact that trauma has on the brain and development and how it relates to others. I want to show you the video of what happens. What happens a lot to the kids and the families we work with is that they live in constant states of stress. So stress is supposed to be adaptive. It's actually good for you. The idea is that you come across stress, you fight with it, you wrestle with it, and then you combat it, and you're better the next time around. So the notion is that you actually learn to master the stress. But oftentimes with the kids that we see and serve, that stress is unrelenting. There's no break from it, ever. And in fact, it's chronic and it's normal. And so that's why they think it's normal to go into a system where weapons are part of life. Again, in the United States, it's shocking to me. I'm like, you're bringing weapons into school and you don't have to? Like, what's going on? Because that's become a normal way to respond to stress in that system. So I wanted to show you a video with what toxic stress does to development.
Learning to deal with stress is an important part of healthy development. When experiencing stress, the stress response system is activated. The body and brain go on alert. there's an adrenaline rush, increased heart rate, and an increase in stress hormone levels. When the stress is relieved after a short time, or a young child receives support from caring adults, the stress response winds down and the body quickly returns to normal. In severe situations, such as ongoing abuse and neglect, where there is no caring adult to act as a buffer against the stress response stays activated. Even when there is no apparent physical harm, the extended absence of response from adults can activate the stress response system. Constant activation of the stress response overloads developing systems, with serious, lifelong consequences for the child. This is known as toxic stress. Over time, this results in a stress response system set permanently on high alert. In the areas of the brain dedicated to learning and reasoning, the neural connections that comprise brain architecture are weaker and fewer in number. Science shows that the prolonged activation of stress hormones in early childhood can actually reduce neural connections in these important areas of the brain at just the time when they should be growing new ones. Toxic stress can be avoided if we ensure that the environments in which children grow and develop are nurturing, stable, and engaging.
I'm back on? I feel like the voice of God. Are we going to edit that one out? I sometimes record my lectures for my students, and so it's very strange to have this experience of like being recorded, and they're like, oh, you're in my head all the time. I was like, okay. I feel okay about that, I think. And other times I'm like, oh yeah, it's good. I need to be in that. So what we saw with the video is what toxic stress does to a child's development. And so what I want to tell you, and if something that you can get out of my talk, is that when you have people and families that are dealing with tremendous amount of unrelenting and toxic stress, their ability to adapt and their ability to respond is going to be very different than folks who didn't grow up in a chronically stressed environment. And so what we have are actually people who have different brain structures. And so I think what this can help people is maybe have a little bit more empathy. And so what you're seeing are people who are standing in front of you who only have had their fear structures activated all the time. And so what happens with trauma's impact on the brain is that you saw where the neural connections, right? So our brain, especially with infants, your brain cells actually grow with the experience because the neurons get stimulated and there's myelination and there's connection that happens. However, if most of your experience is only fear-based, the only types of, and the part of your brain that develops tends to be this part, which is the emotional part. This is the amygdala and the limbic system. So you see that that's hyper-developed, and the frontal cortex, which is sort of this, I never know which part the front is. Does this feel like the front? So the frontal cortex, which is right here, which is where our rational thinking part is, that gets underdeveloped. And so what you have are whole families and systems of people who are living as though their lives are in danger all the time. And so their interaction with you, just because they're in a different building, isn't going to change. It takes a minute to get adjusted, and you have to prove yourself to people. I think people always say, you know, like, they have to respect me, and, you know, that's the stance that I come from, when it's like, well, you don't, it's a jungle out there. And so what kids are coming to and experiencing daily is that their brain system and the way that they're wired, or the way that they are wired to respond to stimuli, is very different than folks who haven't had that experience. And so they may respond by being hypersensitive. You ever have parents or clients who you say something that seems really normal or neutral, and their response is insane, where you're like, what's happening? And a lot of that is they somehow perceived your conversation or your comment or what you thought was rational as a threat. And that makes sense because oftentimes that's the background they're coming from, where things are a threat. And so you have to work on not being a threat. That's why trauma-informed principles starts with basic safety. Are you safe? And can they come in, and when they are dysregulated and they hyper-react or under-react, you're okay with that because you can actually regulate the temperature in the room because you're actually the person that modulates the experience. You don't engage or interact with that fear system in the same way. You switch it up. And so a lot of times what trauma-informed work does for you is it makes you really patient. And it changes the way that you sit with people, which is so critical for interventions that we provide. So they did studies on what forms of interventions and treatments work best, right? So is it CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy? Is it psychodynamics? Is Freud right? Are social workers right? Freud's always right, right? It all goes back to Freud. And what they found was that actually the mode of treatment doesn't matter as much as the relationship does. So it's the engagement piece that's so critical. And I think oftentimes we want results without having to do the tough work of undoing these kinds of circuits and these types of relating. And so attachment, this is why parents matter. Parents are supposed to be the first ones that are supposed to help us regulate our fear structures. They're the ones that model behaviors for us. This is what you do when you get attacked. But don't worry, you don't have to actually engage in that because I will protect you. Right? The role of the parent, that's why they're actually responsible for resolving traumatic stress. Their job is to protect you from these kinds of experiences. And so we lived in poverty in areas that were, we lived in poor areas. We were poor. I didn't know it because it always felt like my parents could always protect me. At the end of the day, regardless of my class and economic status, I felt safe, and I was safe. And so the difference, though, in our kids and the clients that we see and people with those numbers is that parents don't feel safe because they're not well regulated. No one's taught them that, and they have kids, and they can't model that behavior. And it isn't because they're bad or lazy or poor, even poverty. It's because they're wired differently in many ways. And I think that can feel a little bit deterministic, like, oh, they're wired to be bad, right? What the reality is actually their fear structures are wired to be the first thing that they respond to. That's why they'll do better when there's actual war, right? That's who you want to hang with, right? We used to have Coach Shaw. Coach Shaw used to walk around with a big stick. And he used to actually beat kids with it. And I was like, half of the time I lived in shock. And so, but the reality is that he was actually good when things went down because he protected everyone. And so that's good when you're in war and you're in combat, but you're not. But oftentimes in communities riddled with issues, this is why it matters. And so it's vital for development. And so when the parent or the attachment source is the one that's doing the harm, then we have to actually go in and help them and engage with them so that they actually can parent better, so that we have kids that come into our schools that are ready to learn. Parents cannot be the enemies. They're actually our clients. And so this is the adverse childhood experiences. We won't have. So behavioral manifestations, so people who've had trauma and chronic stress, what do they tend to look like? This is the behavior part that oftentimes they come to see us for. Mood instability, sometimes they're okay, sometimes they're not. You feel like you're actually dealing with middle schoolers for the most part, and these are grown people. And even with children, they regress back to sort of younger stages under stress. That makes sense, right? I think I'm probably a good 7th grader when I'm really upset. So, because I just want everyone to like me, and I want everything to go better. We have addictive or compulsive behaviors. People try to self-regulate that dysregulation they feel in their bodies. That makes sense too. When you have high levels of stress and no way to relieve it, you do it with substances. It works. That's why people are addicts. I think for the most part, people think people are addicts because they're bad people. No, it's actually very helpful in bringing down the stress feelings. And so what we have to teach people is a different way of existing. We just did a thing on meth in class, and I said, what are the benefits of meth? And they looked at me like I was crazy. I was like, people use substances for a reason. You have high energy, you lose weight, and you feel like you can accomplish a high number of things. I was like, that sounds wonderful. Where can I get some of that? Right. You smell like urine, though. Like, I was like, oh, I was really going to try that out. Right? But really, the substances work and they make people feel better. So it makes sense. Don't do meth. There's some side effects we talked about later. There's poor communication. So one of the issues with trauma in the brain is that your memory and your ability to connect what's happened to you and to verbalize it and to talk about it in a meaningful way gets impacted, because a lot of your memory becomes very visceral. So you have images. This is where we have PTSD. People, your verbal skills get shut down, because when you're threatened, you don't need to speak, you just need to react, right? And so for the most part, there's poor communication, and that dissociation takes your speech away. So sometimes traumatic events are just encoded as images in your mind. And so then you're not able to communicate what's happened to you. And so that's where we'll work on communication skills with people. It is, you know, sometimes they'll say, I just can't remember. And they say, oh, you just don't want to remember. No, some people can't remember, but their body remembers. So that's where we have flashbacks, or kids instances, they may urinate or they may act out and they don't even know what they're doing. And that's some of that trauma. Hopelessness, of course, you know, people internalize that stress. Inability to discriminate danger. We see that with teenagers. A lot of my teenage girls put themselves in crazy situations where, because everything is dangerous, they can't actually tell what's dangerous. Sometimes they don't feel right unless their fear system is activated. So then they put themselves in dangerous situations so they can reenact the trauma that's happened to them. So that's some of that behavioral manifestation, and that's where that reenactment comes in. People are trying to resolve what's happened. What isn't resolved comes back over and over again in different formats. Our job as service providers is to change that reenactment. I'm not going to be a perpetrator for you. I'm not going to rescue you. People have done that for you. We're going to do this differently. So that's part of the work that we do. And learned helplessness. People start wanting to change because this is normal. I don't care anymore. I think that's where people say it's laziness. I say that's learned helplessness. Because at some point, it becomes better to deny it than to actually do something about it and feel hurt again and go through all that. And then you have impaired parenting. You have parents who can't actually do this for themselves, and they can't do that for their children. Okay. And so as workers, what do we do? So we know that exposure to and experiencing trauma creates lasting imprint on the survivor. So the number one thing is we have to actually understand this process and know that people are coming to us with this in their background, right? And the past is never irrelevant to current reactions. Your job can't be just about that IEP. Let's make sure that mom comes to school. Let's make sure that you're doing, you know, the child gets out of the seat less than 5 times, right? I've done those. Or any number of those things. You actually have to know what's happened to the kid. And then we can actually talk about those kinds of other things, because we can get to the business of the intervention. Survivor behaviors that were once useful can be ineffective and destructive. So that fear structure and fighting with you, they don't need to do that. They can, maybe that works out there in other instances, but that doesn't work here. The other part is that you can't make up for people's past or rescue them. I think a lot of times people said, you baby the clients because you understand them. And I used to, for a long time, think that I was going to rescue kids. You know, I couldn't sleep at night. I had some of that big vicarious trauma. I worried about them. I thought, you know, what's going to happen if I don't intervene? And I had a great supervisor and the realization that these people have been living their lives way before me, and they'll be living their lives after me. And so what I can do is maybe instrumental in shaping something, but I'm not everything. And I'm not meant to be everything, because the community and all of us working together are supposed to do that. And then you provide an alternate path. And so this is where I say working with parents is essential. There are allies. I was doing a visit with a student, and they said, you know, one of the questions I always ask in my visits is, how are you working with parents? And they're like, oh. Right? Parents are hard. They're intimidating. They're also not so great at parenting. That's why their kids are neglected, not learning. So that's the other reality, is that those behavior manifestations are really frustrating. They're really frustrating, and they disappoint you. So you don't want to engage with them. They said, if I could just have the kid, right, and that's all I have to do, that would be great. Well, guess what? The kid actually wants you to work with the parent. They don't want you to be their parent. They love their parents, no matter what happens. And so that's what we have to do. And we have to focus on maternal well-being. If you want to really look at outcomes, you can forget about the dads. I think I have one male student in my class, and I'm always like, oh, sorry, Josh. You know, he's a representative. No, the entire family system is actually important. So I want to introduce self as the model and a way of maybe engaging with folks. And self is borrowed from Sandra Bloom's work with the sanctuary model. How many of you are familiar with sanctuary, right? So, yeah. I just do whatever Sandy tells me to do, and everything works out just fine. So the way that you're going to pull the parents in, as I mentioned before, safety is the most important work that you do. Parents have to feel safe. They have to know that you value them. They have to know that the school cares about them. And parents can mean caregivers, and we have to, I think, expand the definition of what a family looks like as well, too. Because kids could feel like they don't have a mom and a dad in a traditional way. And so then, you know, when you talk about families and bringing them in, you need to define that broadly. One of the ways that, you know, what's the night where parents come visit? Yeah, teacher-parent conferences, that's right. Parents never showed up, right? Or only the good ones did, where you're like, I love Johnny, he's the best. And Johnny's so excited, right? Johnny doesn't need interventions. His parents don't need to come. It's fine. But what we started doing is actually having student-led conferences. So what we would do is prepare and have the students talk about and build their portfolios throughout the semester. So they're always talking about, are you going to come see my folder? So it's a positive relationship. So parents are going to come in and you're going to be like, well, you know, Johnny's a problem, right? And we know that you're the parents don't come to schools because they don't want to feel bad. There's a lot of shame and guilt. And also that they get preached to or they don't feel safe at the school. So we had the case where the kids actually led the conversation. And parents love their kids, just the way that, you know, kids love their parents. They want to see them doing well. And if the kid's been talking about this conference and, you know, this folder they've been working on and what they're learning and all their accomplishments is that strengths base, they're excited to come. And the kids make food. You make it all about the community, engaging that parent in a safe way. It's okay for you to come, right? Emotional regulation. The staff and you have to be emotionally intelligent, okay? You have to know what's happening in the room, what your body responds to, and you have to be the person that regulates the situation. You got to regulate, right? It's actually a clinical term, meaning that you're a container for that space. When they walk in that space, the kids, the parents always know that you're going to be the calm one, that you're going to be the safe one, and that it's going to be okay no matter what. You have boundaries, but you have to be emotionally intelligent. And staff and teachers and administrators have to be emotionally intelligent, right? And so you have to be attuned and relational, meaning you have to be able to, first of all, know your kids, know their parents. So when you see them interact and what people may seem as hostile or this parent seems really aggressive, you know that actually this works for this kid. This is very good. Other times where you see a parent who's harsh, you go, it's killing this kid. This kid's really sensitive. She actually needs someone who's tender. And so you have to work with both parents and navigate that situation. That's what actually we're versed in, right? Loss. It's really important to acknowledge the loss that's happened in communities. One of my favorite things is what isn't resolved comes back to haunt us. So if there's loss at home, how many times have we heard, you know, there's death in the community, or there's loss in the school system, teachers have moved, and it's never recognized or celebrated or acknowledged in any way? You have to have groups and things that acknowledge loss. And so, because when you don't acknowledge and give words to experiences, then it just gets repeated, because someone needs to acknowledge what's happened. And particularly in communities that are marginalized or disfranchised, what you have to do is recognize the loss and the abuse the community has experienced. And so the charge for you as a service provider is, do you actually know what's happened in that community? Do you know why there's high instances of crime? Do you know why people react in a particular way? Have we mourned? You know, do we give voice to the loss? Because you have to be able to recognize that in order for you to have future. And so despite all the negative statistics and despite the fact that we see this tremendous amount of loss and grief, what we do know is that people do really well. And for the most part, you know, our kids are thriving in these systems, and that there's hope, and that there's great interventions that we can do. And so some of the things that you can be involved in, and trauma-informed work, as I said before, doesn't have to be you doing clinical groups to treat grief or traumatic symptoms. You can have groups that celebrate the community, community gardens, right? Incorporating things that are good for the whole person. Doing exercise. We know yoga is actually really powerful for helping resolve trauma. You know, what's surprising is they're actually bringing that back and doing yoga groups with kids. I know they have even infant yoga. It's very cute. That's mostly, I think that's mostly why they have it. It's adorable, right? Talking about nutrition and health. And so that's one of the things. Are people actually getting adequate food, adequate sleep? Is that being talked about? And one of the best interventions that you can do is having groups. You know, yes, individual intervention works, but groups are fantastic for children, they're fantastic for parents, and they're great for teachers. I want to say one last thing about caregivers. And in terms of taking care of yourself, right? We cannot actually do this work without having a plan of care for ourselves. I talked about, you know, having experienced vicarious trauma. I haven't quite gotten out to burnout. So vicarious trauma is where you actually feel some of the symptoms of the clients that you're working with. Oftentimes you can go sort of two routes. You can become numb, right, where it stops affecting you. That's a problem. So when you stop being affected by death, trauma, grief, loss, that's something. And I don't mean you have to, you know, be affected like you're falling out and reacting to it as though it's new. But it stops somehow surprising you, or it stops somehow impacting you. That's an issue. The other side of that is if you can't sleep, if you can't feel like you can shut it off. I knew something was up when I started crying at commercials, all of them. There's no discriminating, right? I was like, oh my God. I kept thinking this world is bad, right? It actually impacted my worldview because I was entrenched in work of trauma. And so I had to have a place where I could take that. What I had was incredible supervisors and people that helped me process that. And so what we can do to this caregiver stress is that you can have caregiver resilience.
Yeah, your microphone went off.
Okay. You get me twice. Thank you. So, first of all, there's no us and them, right? We are impacted by trauma and grief ourselves. We actually get into this work because we have all of us, I'm going to say all of us, have our own baggage. So we got stuff that we're working out. And we have stuff that'll come to us, even if we don't have stuff that we're working out. And so what you have to have is some caregiver resilience, and that's an antidote to work fatigue. And the way that you have that is that, you know, you have to understand the impact of trauma, on working with trauma survivors, what that does to you. You have to understand the factors that increase job satisfaction. So this is research. Training. So when you actually feel empowered and have tools to deal with some of this stuff, you feel better. You actually have ways of competently addressing issues. Improve coping strategies. That's just, you know, code for you should probably eat better and exercise. I'm going to tell you that. As a person who works in this field, your health has to be important. You can't neglect it, right? Have contact with nature. Eat some good fruit. That's one of my interventions when people or my students tell me they're distressed. I say, eat a blueberry. I'll see you later. It really does something for you, actually. And so it's a non-negotiable to take care of yourself. And you have to have supportive work environment. I know that school social workers, as I mentioned before, we're guests in an institution, and sometimes they don't remember that we exist, or may give us a closet as an office. I literally had a closet as an office for one of my schools. So I was like, and then the door shut. I was like, I see, I'm mandated to be here. They're not really ready for me. And so, but my supervisor told me, all you need is one ally in a system. You're not alone. Get one ally, one person that sees you, that you can talk with, that energizes you. They have to energize you. Don't get with someone that's, you know, that's going to pull you down, right? We love talking about how horrible everyone is. You actually have to have someone that empowers you, makes you feel good and hopeful about the work. Because what we do is actually really beautiful. We go into places that nobody wants to. we hear stories that nobody wants to, and people feel better, and their lives get better. And so what we do matters, and it's critical, and we feel good about that. That's why, you know, we put up with the pay, right? And then you have to have a self-care plan. Part of the self-care plan is that you have to be able to detect your own stress. So I know for sure, now I know, because I've had to pay for the consequences of not knowing, that I know particular situations are going to cause me to react in a particular way. So I have a self-care plan where I know that if I don't exercise or if I am only about work for a period of time, that I actually may harm clients because I stop listening to them or feel like I can't take it anymore, and that's harmful. So I make sure I take care of myself. And for those of you that are supervisors or want some tools, the Secondary Traumatic Stress Scale by Figley and Bride, it's a free. It's free. They're happy to share that with you. You can get that. It's accessible on the web. And what that does is it actually helps detect the level of traumatic stress that you're experiencing. So when you're reaching a certain number, it says, you know, hey, you're okay, or 2, you actually need to activate that self-care plan, or in other instances, you may need to take a break and actually see someone because you're not okay. And so that's a great tool. The life events checklist that I have listed there, it's a checklist of stressful experiences that parents have experienced. It's about 30 questions long, and it asks questions like, have you experienced any, so it goes through the, acts of God and acts of man is the only way I can describe it. So have you experienced any floods, fires, you know, goes through sort of major things that people may have experienced. And it says, have you experienced any sexual trauma? But it asks it in a sort of, I just need to know what's happened to you, just so that you can get a gauge of all the, have you experienced this, witnessed it, know someone that's experienced it in your family, or it doesn't apply to you. And so it's just a checklist that says what's happened to you, and it's an inventory that does a nice job of tabulating that for you. And it's available, and that's free as well. So these are some tools that you can use that, you know, help you as a provider to think through how you want to take care of yourself. I spoke for a long time. Okay. Do you have any questions or any points of clarification?
Are we able to get a copy of your slides?
Yes. That was easy. You get an A. Yes, I'm happy to share my slide. Also, if you want a long extended version of this, what I did was I created a trauma-informed case management tool for my dissertation. So that's also available. It's listed on the resource. And so I have actually a curriculum that I'm going to publish it. This is one of the things I promised the dean. So the curriculum outlines ways that you can assess, ways that you can treat. It's got all these tools on there. It's got a list of helpful resources as well. So one of the things I realized as a service provider, especially when I was doing work in shelters in rural areas, was that there's great evidence-based treatments. I just can't afford it. You know, the models were $40,000 to start. And so the thing that I did was I compiled all of the stuff that existed that's free and used process-oriented, like a motivational interviewing and stages of change as ways of actually engaging with people to create a curriculum. So that's available to you, along with all the resources. Please share all this information. You know, the more people know, the better. Okie dokie. Well, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. I'm going to go and eat blueberries.